When you try to picture a member of the Mafia, you typically think of dangerous-looking men armed with semi-automatic weapons. Numerous gangs, cartels, and criminal organizations are typically run by and made up of men. However, some women have shown that leadership in these groups is not always restricted by gender. Despite this overwhelming lack of female representation, many women have proven that they can be just as calculating and dangerous as their male counterparts. Judy Moran. Born on December 18, 1944, Judy Marianne Moran was the matriarch of Melbourne's most notorious criminal family, the Moran family, and godmother of the Melbourne Mafia. Not much is known about Judy's early life. However, it is certain that she married Leslie John Johnny Cole in 1963, and the couple had a son named Mark. In 1982, Leslie John Cole was murdered in Sydney in a drug-related gangland conflict. At the time, Judy had already divorced John and was in a relationship with Lewis Moran, an Irish-Australian criminal and patriarch of the Moran family. By 1966, Judy married Lewis, and the couple had a son, Jason Moran. However, the Morans separated in 1995. Although Judy and Lewis Moran were divorced, her children had ties to the family's criminal activities, and life as a Moran was neither safe nor long. The early 2000s ushered in a wave of deaths in the Moran family. Her first son, Mark, was murdered in 2000. Then her other son, Jason, was murdered shortly after in 2003. In 2004, her ex-husband, Lewis, was murdered. All three men reportedly died during the city's worst gangland clashes. Within weeks of her ex-husband's death, Judy reportedly contracted celebrity agent Harry M. Miller to write and publish her autobiography. She claimed she wanted to use the book to tell her story and clear her estranged husband's name. The book, My Story, was first released in February 2005. A week after its release, the publishing house was forced to recall the book after it was revealed that it contained false allegations concerning Fred Sylvester, a deceased Victorian detective. The book was reprinted without the false allegations and was re-released in May of that same year. On June 15, 2009, Judy's brother-in-law, Des Tuppence Moran, was found dead in Ascot Vale. The following day, Judy Moran and three other suspects were arrested and charged in connection with Des Moran's murder. Her two known accomplices were 45-year-old Suzanne Kane, sister-in-law of Judy's deceased son Jason, and 43-year-old Jeffrey Amour, Kane's partner. Judy Moran and Suzanne Kane were subsequently charged with being accessories after the fact, while Jeffrey Amour was charged with murder. During her trial, the police revealed that Judy was the getaway driver in the shooting murder. They presented CCTV footage that allegedly showed Judy as the driver scouting out where Des Moran was supposed to be on the morning of his death. They also showed footage where bystanders appeared to have been running away from the shooting. The police also discovered the getaway car in her garage and the white gloves she reportedly wore while driving. They found a gun in the getaway car, and while searching her house, they found a safe hidden behind a bookshelf. The safe contained 3 handguns, a wig, 2 stolen license plates, and clothing that matched eyewitness descriptions of the shooters. On June 17, 2009, the Melbourne Magistrates Court denied Judy and Suzanne Kane bail on the grounds that their access to weapons made them a danger to the community. On June 9, 2011, Judy Moran was found guilty of murder for orchestrating the shooting of Des Moran. The following day, she was sentenced to 26 years in prison, with a minimum of 21 years without parole. Ma Barker, Arizona Donnie Clark, popularly known as Kate Barker or Ma Barker, was the mother of the boys who made up one half of the Barker-Karpus gang during the Public Enemy era. The Barker-Karpus gang was one of the prominent criminal gangs whose activities occupied the time of the press and the lives of civilians in the Midwestern part of the United States. During the lifespan of the gang, Ma Barker was reputed as a ruthless and vicious crime matriarch who organized and controlled her son's criminal activities. Born in Ash Grove, Missouri as Arizona Donnie Clark, Ma Barker married George Barker in 1892. The couple had 4 sons during the marriage: Herman, Lloyd, Arthur, and Fred. Living as a poor, illiterate family in Tulsa City, reports claim that the Barker boys have a long history of crime. The earliest record of their criminal activities goes as far back as 1910, when the authorities arrested Herman Barker for highway robbery after running over a child in his getaway car. As time passed, the Barker boys became involved in more serious and heinous crimes, such as murder, kidnapping, and armed robbery. However, Ma's contribution to the gang's kidnappings and robberies has never been accurately documented, although there have been several reports that she only acted as a motherly figure to her criminal sons and traveled with them across the country. On August 29, 1927, Ma lost her first son, Herman, in a shootout with police officers in Wichita, Kansas. Herman reportedly killed an officer during the shootout by shooting him in the mouth at point-blank range. He attempted to escape, but didn't get far before he crashed his getaway vehicle. The crash left him seriously injured, but Herman Herman killed himself before the police could arrest him. In 1928, all of Ma's boys were serving time in different federal and state prisons. Lloyd Barker was imprisoned in the federal penitentiary at Leavenworth, Kansas. Arthur was in the Oklahoma State Prison, and Fred was in the Kansas State Prison. In the same year, Ma Barker reportedly became a divorcee after she kicked her husband George out of the house. Other reports claim that he left Ma and their sons after their criminal life and its consequences, particularly the death of Herman, became too much for him. While her sons were in prison, Ma lived in abject poverty with no job and no husband. Her fortunes began turning around after she met her husband, Arthur W. Dunlop, in 1930. In 1931, her son Fred was released from jail. After his release, he joined fellow ex-convict Alvin Karpus to form the Barker-Karpus Gang. The gang wreaked havoc until they killed Sheriff C. Roy Kelly in West Plains, Missouri on December 19, 1931, a crime that forced them to flee the region. After his release in 1932, Arthur joined Karpus and his brother Fred to form the core of the Barker-Karpus Gang. After a short while, the group moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, where they expanded their robbery operations to include kidnapping under the protection of the St. Paul Police Chief, Chief Thomas Big Tom Brown. Ma and her sons were forced to flee St. Paul after they received a tip that the police had discovered their hideout. The group fled to Menominee, Wisconsin. By 1993, the group had returned to St. Paul, Minnesota, where they kidnapped two wealthy businessmen, William Ham and Edward Bremer, for a combined ransom of $300,000. The kidnapping of Edward Bremer was the last major criminal activity of Ma and the Barker-Karpus Gang. The FBI brought down its full force on the gang, forcing them to abandon St. Paul for the second time. Her boys hid Ma in various apartments in the Chicago area while they tried to launder the ransom. On January 8, 1935, the FBI arrested her son Arthur in Chicago and found a map on him that led them to the hideout of Ma Barker and her other son Fred. Agents surrounded the house and demanded surrender, but Fred opened fire on the agents. Both Fred and Ma were reportedly killed in an intense hours-long shootout. Maria Licciardi. The Camorra is one of the oldest and most notorious criminal mafia syndicates operating in and around Europe. Since it was created in the 17th century, the Camorra's activities have contributed to the high levels of murder in the areas where it operates, and is considered by the Italian government as the most murderous and violent criminal organization in Italy. The organization's primary businesses included racketeering, drug trafficking, counterfeiting, and money laundering. This was the heritage and legacy that Maria Licciardi inherited by birthright. Born on March 24, 1951, Maria Licciardi, nicknamed La Piccolina, was raised in the Neapolitan suburb of Secondigliano, a well-known operation base of the Licciardi clan. All her family members were members of the Camorra. Her father was a popular local boss in the region. One of her brothers, Gennaro Licciardi, popularly known as Asigna, climbed the Camorra ranks and became a clan head and founding member of the Secondigliano alliance. In the mid-90s, power shift within one of the Camorra clans ushered in an era of terror throughout Naples and neighboring cities. After the arrest of her husband in 1993 and two brothers, Maria Licciardi rose to power and took over as head of the clan. She became the first female boss of the Licciardi clan and the godmother of the Secondigliano alliance. Under her leadership, the organization, which was popular for its overt and violent image, became more sophisticated and secretive, consequently making it more powerful. Maria was no stranger to the administrative responsibilities of running a cartel. Shortly after becoming head of the alliance, Maria Licciardi brought control and stability to the warring factions and proposed that the clans share the city to expand their drug trade and racketeering business. This led to the formation of a fragile coalition of 20 Camorra clans. Under her leadership, the Camorra clan deviated from its code that prohibited them from profiting from prostitution. She created a pipeline by purchasing girls from the Albanian Mafia for $2,000. Many girls came on the promise of legitimate work and a better life, only to be enslaved and forced into prostitution. By the mid-90s, the Mafia's activities were thriving, and its drug trade reportedly brought in €500,000 daily. Maria's reign ran smoothly until a disagreement arose over a consignment of unrefined heroin in the spring of 1999. The LaRusso clan, one of the clans in the Camorra alliance, went behind Maria's back and released pure, unrefined heroin to the market, leading to the deaths of many addicts on the streets. As a result, the authorities focused on the Camorra clans, subsequently arresting many clan leaders. The disobedience and subsequent secession of the LaRusso clan caused the alliance to disintegrate, leading to a full-blown war. The clans went to war over territories in a fight that claimed the lives of over 120 people in Naples. The damage and effects of the war were too grave for authorities to ignore. They launched investigations into Maria Licciardi, and she was subsequently featured on the 30 Most Wanted Italians list in 2001. She became a fugitive, and with the aid of an elite network of protection, Maria evaded capture for 2 years. While on the run, she continued working as the boss of the Licciardi clan. In January 2001, she reportedly bombed the house of senior prosecutor Luigi Bobbio as a warning for him to stop investigating her clan's activities. On June 14, 2001, Naples police arrested Maria Licciardi in Melito, near Naples. She was charged and subsequently sentenced to prison. While in prison, she maintained her control over the clan. After almost 8 years, Maria was released in 2009. On June 26, 2019, she became a fugitive for the second time after narrowly escaping an anti-Camorra operation against the Second Digliano Alliance. About 2 months later, on August 7, 2021, authorities arrested Maria Licciardi at Rome's Ciampino Airport while she was traveling to Spain. Virginia Hill. How can a farm girl from a small town in the Deep South become one of the most iconic female figures in Mafia history? This was the question Senator Charles W. Tobey of New Hampshire posed to the charming but coy Miss Hill during the Kefauver Senate Committee hearings on organized crime in 1951, to which Miss Hall answered, "I'm the best in the whole damned world." Born in Lipscomb, Alabama on August 26, 1916, Oni Virginia Hill, dubbed Queen of the Mob by the media, was a notorious American crime figure. Her rise to power in the criminal underground started after she became a courier for high-ranking members of the Chicago Mafia in the mid-1930s. In 1933, Virginia, who was 15 at the time, left Georgia for Chicago with Randall, her teenage husband. Virginia hoped to escape the poverty of her small town and moved to the city with hopes of entering the pornography industry. She divorced her husband a year after moving to Chicago. During the 1933 Century of Progress Chicago's World Fair, she got a job as a waitress to supplement her earnings as a sex worker. Young Virginia became the love interest of wealthy gambler and bookmaker Joseph Epstein. Epstein was reported to be Jake Guzik's lieutenant in the racing wire racket. Soon after, she became Epstein's lover. Years later, Epstein would tell Meyer Lansky, "Once that girl is under your skin, it's like a cancer. It's incurable." Through Epstein, Virginia Hill became a part of the Chicago Outfit Crime Organization. Her connections brought her in contact with many of the organization's top names, including men like Rocco Fischetti, Lucky Luciano, Frank Nitti, and Joe Adonis. She became close with these men and reportedly had sexual relationships with most of them. In addition to being a mistress for the mob, she began working as a courier for them, transporting large amounts of money and delivering messages between them. She was known to have more than just another set of curves. Reports claim that she was a central figure for intelligence on organized crime. Her work with Al Capone and the Chicago mob saw her travel to New York to keep tabs on the Luciano family boss, Joe Adonis, which she did by becoming his lover. For Virginia, Joe Adonis was a job, but Joe had fallen deeply in love with her. During her time in New York, she met one of Luciano's colleagues, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, who would later become her lover to the dismay of Joe Adonis. Although there have been no reports to confirm the story, Virginia and Siegel were rumored to be married after the latter reportedly divorced his wife in 1946. Virginia and Siegel's relationship was reported to be very volatile, but the couple always seemed to resolve their issues. Siegel, who was a jealous lover, would repeatedly challenge anybody who got too close to his girl. However, he ran into some trouble when his luxurious hotel, Flamingo, reportedly named after his affectionate nickname for Virginia, showed little returns. Despite several warnings, Siegel was adamant about selling his share of the hotel, which led his associates to believe he was skimming the profits and using Virginia to move them to Swiss bank accounts. On June 20th, 1947, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel was shot dead by a sniper through the window of Virginia Hill's Beverly Hills mansion in California. Interestingly, 4 days before his murder, Virginia booked an unscheduled flight to Paris, France, which led to the speculation that she had set Siegel up to die. In 1951, she was subpoenaed to testify during the Kefauver Senate hearings, where she denied any involvement with the Mafia, despite being called the Queen of the Gangster Malls by the Times in March of 1951. On March 24, 1966, 49-year-old Virginia Hill committed suicide by overdosing on sleeping pills in Coppell. Rosetta Kudalo, born January 1, 1937. Rosetta Kudalo is the sister of Raffaele Kudalo, the the boss of the Camorra Mafia and founder of the Nuova Camorra Organizzata, NCO, an organization he created to restore the Camorra. Popularly known as Uochi e Ghiaccio, which translates to Ice Eyes, Rosetta reportedly handled the day-to-day activities of NCO, while her brother spent most of his days behind bars. She was the driving force behind him for over 15 years, without which the NCO would have collapsed. She relayed his instructions from prison and helped him build his army of loyal foot soldiers. Investigators claim that Rosetta had pledged not to marry a husband, dedicating herself to overseeing her brother's criminal organization and activities. Operating in a male-dominated field, Rosetta Kudalo soon earned the respect of her male colleagues. Her business acumen and toughness soon became a tale of legend and helped her maintain control during her reign. However, many important members of the group did not believe she held any relevant role because she was a woman. Between 1970 and 1980, Rosetta ordered the execution of many of the Kudalo's family enemies. She also allegedly ordered the assassination of several prominent figures, including the deputy chief of Naples's Poggioriale prison, where her brother and other clan members had served time. Authorities also maintain that she was responsible for her brother's unsuccessful jailbreak attempt in 1978. According to the police, Rosetta Kudalo was directly responsible for the clan's finances. She acted as the treasurer, creating strategies for their protection rackets, money laundering, prostitution, and drug trafficking activities. Rosetta and Kudalo's right-hand man, Vincenzo Casillo, worked with executive members of the Camorra clans and Sicilian Mafia to end the war between the NCO and their competitors from the Nuova Familia. In October 1981, Rosetta Kudalo was forced into hiding by the police after authorities raided one of her strongholds, forcing her to escape under a rug in a car driven by one of the neighborhood priests. As a fugitive, she maintained control of the organization's operations from safe houses in different cities while successfully evading authorities for over a decade. In her absence, she was sentenced to almost 10 years in prison for organized crime activities. In addition, she was wanted for offenses including extortion, murder, and armed robbery. In February 1993, she gave herself up after police discovered her hideout. According to police reports, 20 officers in Ottaviano in the east of Naples went at dawn on the 9th of February to a villa that belonged to Raffaele Kudalo's wife. Some officers surrounded the villa, while others walked up to the door and knocked. Reports state that Rosetta Kudalo willingly appeared when it was clear she could not escape. She offered no resistance and was quoted to have said, "I am tired of being a fugitive." Rosetta reportedly burst into tears and told the officers that she had been contemplating turning herself in, but she feared that she might have been murdered in jail by a rival clan. Her first request after she was apprehended was that she be put in an isolated cell. After her arrest, her initial 9-year sentence was reduced to 5. Although the prosecution argued that Rosetta Kudalo ran her brother's organization, she was acquitted on 9 murder charges. Rosetta pleaded that she was harmless, and her frumpy image helped prove her case. Thelma Wright. Raised in a loving Catholic household in South Philadelphia, Thelma Wright graduated from St. Maria Goretti High School before attending Temple University, where she majored in real estate management. After she graduated college, she moved to Los Angeles, California, where she dabbled into different business ventures. She, however, returned to Philadelphia after spending several years in California. In 1977, a young Thelma Wright, who was in her early 20s, met her future husband, Jackie Wright. Jackie was a prominent figure in the Philadelphia drug world and one of the city's top heroin wholesalers. He also had ties to the Black Mafia, a dangerous street gang in Philadelphia notorious for killing cops. Thelma would later admit that she was aware of her husband's drug trade and was comfortable with its realities because of the lifestyle it afforded her and her son, who was born in 1982. In August 1986, 4 years after the birth of their son, mob boss Jackie Wright was murdered. His body was found rolled up in a rug with a fatal gunshot wound to the head. After her husband's death, Thelma took over his operations, doing whatever she needed to ensure she could sustain herself and her son. She began operations by collecting all the money people owed her deceased husband and financing his debt to an Asian lady known as Auntie. In the early 90s, Philadelphia was the center of drug distribution, primarily cocaine and heroin. This environment provided a fertile ground for Thelma to grow and run a large criminal organization that operated from Philadelphia but had operational bases across the country. She oversaw the transportation of large quantities of heroin and cocaine between Philadelphia and Los Angeles. months. Over time, Thelma fell in love with the drug lifestyle. She adopted the lessons she learned from her deceased husband and used them to organize and plan major operations. At the peak of her success, Thelma was on top of the world. Reports estimated that her operations generated up to $400,000 in profit every month. Her exploits earned her various nicknames, including Queen Pin and Boss Lady. In July 1991, the Boss Lady decided to walk away from the life of crime after 3 tragedies affected the trajectory of her life. First, her friend was caught in the crossfire of a gangland shootout. Second, her associate, Fats, was arrested and sent to prison. Third, her drug connect was killed by a rival gang. By the end of the year, Thelma Wright walked away from the drug game for good. Without the fat checks from the drug trade to sustain her, Thelma was forced to face the realities of single motherhood. She took on a full-time job, and in no time, she was navigating the corporate ladder like an average Jane in the office. Thelma navigated the corporate space excellently and built a career for herself in the real estate industry. She stayed out of the public eye for years until 2009, when she worked for a nonprofit organization responsible for managing properties for women dealing with mental health issues and addiction. In 2011, Thelma Wright decided to revisit the life she left behind when she finally came clean in her memoir titled With Eyes from Both Sides: Living My Life in and Out of the Game. In 2015, she created the Thelma Wright Foundation, an organization focused on motivating young, at-risk women to focus on education rather than incarceration and avoid getting involved with drugs and gangs, particularly women who men have led into the drug life. Stephanie St. Clair. Stephanie St. Clair rose to the top of New York's underworld in the 1920s. She became a prominent figure involved in illegal gambling and racketeering. She built a successful empire while amassing a fortune for herself in the process. Born of African descent to a single mother, Felicienne in the West Indies, her immediate family was relatively wealthy and had risen to become a part of the black social elite class. All this changed after her father died. His death caused the family's social status to fall, and some reports claim that it caused Stephanie to travel alone to North America in 1911 at 13. Some reports, however, claim that Stephanie St. Clair was born in 1887 and made the trip to North America when she was 23. What is certain is that Stephanie St. Clair was living in New York City as a lady in her mid-20s. She settled in Harlem and joined the 40 Thieves, an old crime gang in the city. Her involvement with the gang created a foundation that helped launch Stephanie into the illegal gambling scene. By 1923, she was infamous for her involvement in the numbers business and establishing her policy bank. By 1930, her net worth was estimated to be roughly $500,000. She became one of the prominent black gangsters of the time, and like other established mobsters, she developed a public persona as a way to interact with the community. She developed an interest in community activism and became a voice speaking against injustices the black community faced in Harlem, including police brutality. She publicly accused senior police officers of corruption, and the police retaliated by arresting her on inflated charges. After spending 10 months in a workhouse, Stephanie St. Clair testified to the Seabury Commission about the bribes she paid to police officers and officers who participated in the numbers game. The commission reportedly fired over a dozen corrupt officers after Stephanie's testimony. In 1930, American mobster Dutch Schultz moved into the Harlem gambling scene. Schultz launched a campaign of intimidation and violence on other policy banks. By 1931, all other policy bankers except Stephanie had retired or submitted control of their business to Schultz. This led to a war between Dutch Schultz and Stephanie St. Clair. For nearly 2 years, Stephanie operated primarily through her trusted lieutenant, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. During that time, she fought off Dutch Schultz while maintaining her public persona and advocating for the victims of police brutality. When Schultz was killed for disobeying the commission's order prohibiting him from killing the special prosecutor investigating his bootlegging business, St. Clair sent him a telegram that read, "As ye sow, so shall ye reap." By the 1940s, Bumpy Johnson had become the leading man in Harlem, while Stephanie became less involved in the numbers business. After she retired from the gambling scene, she became an advocate for political reform. In the late 1930s, Stephanie met Sufi Abdul Hamid, popularly called Black Hitler, for his anti-Semitic and Nazi-type activism. Stephanie would eventually marry Abdul Hamid, but the marriage went downhill quickly when he reportedly had an affair with a fortune teller. In January 1938, Stephanie shot Hamid in a fight over his affair with the fortune teller. She was sentenced to 2 to 10 years in prison and was released in the early 1940s. After her release, Stephanie St. Clair lived a quiet life and continued to write columns in the newspaper about issues facing the black community. She passed away in 1969, shortly before her 73rd birthday. Jemiker Thompson. Jemiker Thompson Hairston, the Queen Pin as she would later be called, is a former American drug dealer who rose to the top of the cocaine trade at the height of the 1980s crack epidemic in the United States. Thompson controlled her operations from her base in South Central Los Angeles, although she had other distribution centers in various cities across the country. Thompson's obsession with money and control began after she and her mother were evicted from their South LA home when she was about 8 years old. While in high school, Thompson was a track star and the girlfriend of Anthony Daff Mosley, who was an active drug dealer at the time. Daff introduced her to the drug game, and Thompson began collecting payments for him after a while. Her responsibilities grew over time, and she soon started selling about 3 to 4 kilos of cocaine a week as a high school student. The power couple continued their cocaine selling business. Their success and flamboyant lifestyle established them as the biggest cocaine dealers in LA. They got married in 1980, and by 1982, the couple had a son and a home in Encino, California. After the birth of their son, Anthony, Thompson began thinking of quitting the cocaine business and keeping her son away from street life. However, there was no happy ever after for the couple, as Daffy was killed shortly after Anthony was born. After her husband's death, DEA agents who watched Thompson assumed she would stop her drug business, and she did for a little while. She stepped away from the drug business to mourn her husband privately, but ultimately returned after one of her associates convinced her to start selling again. In 1984, she expanded her business by employing distributors in different states across the country. Soon after, she began receiving direct shipments of cocaine from producers in Colombia. At 26, she established her upscale hair distribution business in Hollywood, which she used as a front to launder drug money. Her reign as Queen Pin ended abruptly after her then-boyfriend and business partner, Percy Cheese Bratton, was apprehended with kilos of cocaine in his car. Percy quickly made a deal with the authorities, giving them evidence to indict Jemiker Thompson. Soon after, Thompson became a fugitive and used her connections to escape arrest for 18 months. Thompson eventually came out of hiding to attend her son's graduation ceremony, but was arrested at the event in front of her son. After her arrest, she was charged and convicted. While awaiting sentencing, she encountered Jesus Christ and converted to Christianity. Jemiker Thompson was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but was released after serving 12 years of her sentence. After her release, she established a Christian ministry called Second Chance Evangelical Ministries, reunited with her son, and married Champ Hairston. She published a memoir about her life in 2010 and was the subject of different TV adaptations of her story, including an episode of the Netflix series Drug Lords. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check our other similar and amazing videos on the screen. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.